morning, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for this evening's live stream here from the National Volunteer and Philanthropy Centre's TikTok account at City of Good SG. Now, City of Good is a vision for Singapore, where individuals, organisations and leaders come together to give their best for others. So today, 10th of September, as many of you know, is World Suicide Prevention Day, and it's a really, really important topic. We will be discussing with my esteemed panel here, working together to prevent suicide. So I'm going to introduce our panel now. I'm Simone Heng, your host for today. Thank you so much for having me. And here to the side of me, Mr. Eric Chua, who is Parliamentary Secretary for Minister of Culture, Community and Youth and Social and Family Development. Also, I've got on the other side of me, Ms. Charlene Heng. She's Head of Core Services at Samaritan Singapore, which of course is a really well-known organisation that does some incredible work focusing on crisis intervention and of course suicide prevention. On the other side of Charlene, we have Elaine Leck, who is the co-founder of the Please Stay movement, an advocacy group calling for unity and support to prevent suicide among young people here in Singapore. And on the other side of Eric, I have Mr. Koo Yi Feng, a youth support worker from the Community Health Assessment Team and the Institute of Mental Health. Thank you so much to everybody on the panel today for giving up time in your very busy schedules to be here. This is such an important topic. Suicide is among the top 20 causes of death globally, not just in Singapore. I myself lost my mentor in April of this year during the global shutdown to suicide. Suicide is also a leading cause of death for those aged to 10 to 29 in Singapore. And according to the Samaritans of Singapore, there are 3 times more cases of suicide in Singapore than traffic accidents. And last year in 2019, we lost 400 people who took their own lives. So we're here today to discuss this really important topic with our esteemed panel, all about preventing suicide. This live stream will last for about an hour, and we hope that you can stay with us all the way online to learn just everything we can about this topic from our distinguished speakers. During this live stream, please feel free to share in the comments. That's what TikTok is all about. But I must tell you that because of the speed of the live stream, we won't actually be able to take Q&A live, unfortunately. However, if you need to talk to someone, we would like you please to call the Samaritans of Singapore 24-hour hotline. The number is 1800 221 4444. 1800 221 4444. Please, if you are in need to talk to someone, please call that line. We're flashing it up right now. So now let's hear more from our panelists who've given their time this evening to speak with us. First, beginning with our Parliamentary Secretary, Eric Chua. You yourself do a lot of work with mentorship. What is your priority for your new role and your experience working with young people?
Well, thanks very much for the introduction, Simone, and also for setting the background for all of us. I think the topic of suicide as well as youth mental well-being has been quite the rage in Singapore in recent years. And I think that is a reflection of the times that we are in. And if you compare the youth of today versus the youth of yesterday, people like me, right?
Our generation.
My age, our generation. And I think the main difference is that the youth of yesteryears versus the youth of today they are digital natives, and yesteryears, we were not quite digital natives. We are quite the digital migrants, right? And so youth of today do a lot of things online. You know, it's on social media, they communicate, they interact with friends, they consume the news online, on social media as well. But I think a lot of people ask the question, then is social media the problem? My own view is that I take a neutral view to that question. The platform itself isn't quite the problem. The problem is, or the issue is with users. How do we use social media? How do we use social media like TikTok, like Facebook, like Twitter? And how do we react to living on social media? And I think we need to get used to the fact that the algorithms on social media, you know, that runs on engagement, really gets us to focus on the things that we like a little bit more. So in a way, we'll get more feeds on things that we like, on more feeds that will actually echo our views. And oftentimes, there are also many studies that talk about, users of social media feeling a little depressed because you see others having a good time, right? Because you want to put your best foot forward when you post something on social media. How then, the big question is, where then do we go from here? And I think my own take to that is that we need to go it together. I mean, we need to do this together. There's an African proverb that says, if you want to run fast,
I love this
go it
one.
alone, right? But if you want to go far, we do it together, right? And here's where we need to do it together. So it's not just an issue that youth have to grapple with themselves. It's not just the parents who have to, guide the youth themselves. It's not just the school teachers who have to face this alone. It's in fact the whole of society, all the stakeholders, you, me, all you folks out there on the other side of the screen. We have all a stake in this, and I really hope today's conversation is a good start, and that signals everyone's commitment, I hope, in doing something for suicide, the issue of suicide, as well as youth mental well-being in Singapore.
I absolutely echo those thoughts. I mean, in my own work on human connection, I believe technology is not the villain, but we all also need to have boundaries.
That's right.
Thank you so much. And now I'd like to ask Ms. Charlene Heng from the Samaritans of Singapore to explain a little bit about your mission and what you're passionate about in what you do.
Yeah, my name is Charlene. I'm social work trained for the past 15 years. And I spent a good 7 to 10 years working with young people, ranging from disadvantaged families to those who have to serve a prison sentence for some of the offences. And I love them because they always show the most real part of them. So that's why I look forward to be here today. The youths, the adults that we see today in social service, a lot of times are the youths who were not heard when they were younger. Not heard either by their friends, by loved ones, by people in maybe in school, society at large. And we hope today we can do something, right where they are, young people. Yeah, so that's my heartbeat.
That's amazing, and I agree. Like, the need for significance, the need to be seen and acknowledged is so primal to us as human beings. Thank you so much. I could talk to you about that all day, but I have to go now to Elaine Leck. Elaine, please tell us more about your personal story and your mission.
Okay, for me, I guess it's very different. I lost my son almost 2 years ago. When he was studying in Melbourne, he was only 17 years old. And I decided to turn my tears and my pain into something meaningful, working together with the agencies in Singapore and the ministries through the Please Stay movement to try to make a difference, because I strongly believe suicide is preventable, and what we need is really a national strategy with a lead agency in Singapore to try to coordinate all the efforts. Because coming from the Please Stay movement that we just started less than a year ago, we have a lot of meaningful conversations with a lot of parties, but it's still very patchy, and it's still very fragmented. So being part of the Please Stay movement, we hope to share our lived experience and a collective voice, including mine. I'm coming from a mother's perspective,
I can't imagine what the loss must be like, and thank you so much for sharing that story with us. And now, Mr. Ku Yi Feng, if you could tell us more about your mission for the work that you do.
Sure. So hi, my name is Yi Feng, and I'm a youth support worker at the Community Health Assessment Team. I think growing up, I had some of my own challenges with dealing with mental health concerns as well. So I think it was always about, when I was getting better and all, I think that one of my mentors, as well as my family, always say, pay it forward, right? You have gotten the help, but you could pay it forward. And so that was really something that drives me, I think, each and every day to do the work I do. So currently I'm at the Community Health Assessment Team, which is short for CHAT, where we are the AAA batteries that powers up youth mental health in Singapore through, first, I think, assessment, as in the name itself. We provide a mental health check at no cost, and the other one is to enable access to mental health resources, both offline and also online. And of course, I think, to raise awareness. So we're really glad to be here at this platform today.
Thank you so much, and thank you all of you for joining us. We're going to now head into a bit of a guided discussion, and I'll address some questions to our panel. Please, if you feel free to add anything to an existing panelist's answers, jump in. So this first question is addressed to Mr. Eric Chua and Ms. Charlene Heng. Recent Samaritans of Singapore statistics showed worrying numbers of suicide amongst young Singaporeans in their 20s. What do you think are the key risk factors for youth that we should all have a more candid conversation around. And I'll begin that with Eric.
Sure. I think we understand, there are many causes for suicide. Each case is going to be unique and specific in itself. So, but I think that is if there's to be one thing that we need to do better against, and that is, I think, in 3 words: stigma, stigma, stigma. Do we all know that actually, according to a survey that was recently done, 6 in 10 persons actually feel that mental health conditions are a result of a lack of willpower as well as self-determination.
Wow.
And 5 in 10 amongst those who were surveyed actually think that they don't want to work or live near somebody who has got a mental health condition.
Wow.
So to me, it's a big fat stigma word that we need to address. We need to look at it in the eye. That's the big elephant in the room that nobody's quite talking about. And because nobody's even talking about mental health conditions in the first place, because there's just so much stigma attached to it. And we need to address that before we can start moving on to, talk about increasing peer support, talk about increasing the help that we can make available for the people who need it. Yeah.
I think this is also a question of culture too. As an Asian person myself, there were very few discussions growing up about mental health. And so I often post about my social media about my own journey with grief therapy, losing my father, my mother becoming paralyzed, to try and normalize it as well.
Right.
So I think that's so key. And Charlene, could you add to that topic as well? What do you think are some conversations we need to have around the subject of risk factors for youth?
Okay, I want to add on to what Mr. Eric mentioned about stigma. A personal story was one day I was at a wedding. Wedding's supposed to be a happy thing, right? So that time I was in my late 20s. And then 4 of us, we have not met each other for 2 years. And then we come together with our cocktail, drink, and then how are you? And then one person just started, one guy just started saying, yeah, not good, I haven't been sleeping well, I've been having insomnia. And then actually, I've seen a psychiatrist. Then the rest of us is like, and then the second one, actually me too. Yeah, I was diagnosed with depression.
Wow.
And then I say me too. Okay, mine was a PTSD. Yeah, and then after that, I struggled with some anxiety and all that. 4 of us and 3.
Wow.
And it started with the first person being courageous to say. I was the 3rd one who confessed. Yeah. So I wanted to say stigma is something that is just take the first one. So if you're a young person watching this right now, I want to tell you that there is a root to suicide, and that very root is not stress. The root is pain. If today any one of us find that living is being punished, we feel punished for living, and coupled with hopelessness that there is no future, or my adults around me tell me there's a bright future, but I don't see the point. That's not what I want. Pain, hopelessness increase the ideation. And for a young person, 20 to 29, is even more risky because as they grow, they actually have increased means to those to attempt. Increased means as in the capability of the opportunity. What we are trying to say is, what are some conversations that we need to start talking about? I say 2 S. The first S is starting from ourselves and our society. We need to start to talk about, be real about the word success. Yes. How do we define success? And the second word is strength. How do we define a strong person? And I tell you, a strong person is someone who dare to be vulnerable.
Yes.
When they are at their weakest. Just like my friend, the first one, holding a cocktail. He's very handsome, okay, but he dared to share that he actually was going through a bad time. Yeah, so 2S, open conversation, and you can start to define for yourself what is success and what it means to be strong. Asking for help, again I appeal to you, asking for help is not giving up. Asking for help is when you refuse to give up. That's why you ask for help. Call us or text us if you need to.
It's incredible, I couldn't agree more. I'm now going to address Mr. Eric Chua again and Mr. Ku Yifeng again for our next question. With COVID-19, the pandemic has obviously had a huge effect on mental health. Young people may be increasingly anxious about education, employment prospects. This also ties into what Charlene just said about this idea of what success is and their future. How should they be coping with this uncertainty? Oh, big question, intense question.
I think the first thing is to realize that COVID-19, no doubt, is the crisis of a generation. But I think Singapore, in our short 50 over years of history, we've had our fair share of crises. Starting with the early 70s when the British withdrew east of Suez. And that move actually threatened to take away 20% of our GDP. But we survived. And there were many other crises that came our way. The Asian financial crisis, the global financial crisis. In the early 2000s, there was SARS, and then there was World Trade Center and the terrorism threat. But each time, we survived each of those crises. So I think there is hope. I think the government has time and again signaled that we will be behind Singaporeans and we will be sure that no Singaporean gets left behind. So I think that is the first level reassurance that I want to give out to all our youths out there, especially those who are tuning in right now. Then how then do we take care of ourselves? I think a few levels. For our own self, I think it takes a few simple steps. If you feel stressed, which I often do myself, it's good to just sit down, do some deep breathing exercises, right? Get your balance in place again. And you know, fun fact, I learned somewhere that deep breathing exercises actually allows us to detoxify our bodies by up to as much as 70%. Wow, I was quite surprised. So I went online to search and yeah, it's quite true. Some studies have proven that. So deep breathing, self-care, take some time alone for yourself. And if you really feel that you need to reach out to others, right? Reach out to mentors. And there are a lot of organizations out there. Take for instance, Advisory, take for instance, the Mentoring Alliance. These are groups that has got passionate individuals, passionate adult individuals who stand ready to reach out to a younger person, to offer some advice. And because many of them find that in the process of offering advice to a younger person, they themselves learn as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I've been a mentor to IT students for the past, 6 years now. And I find that each year when I mentor a young person, I myself learn a lot in the process. And it really is a very fulfilling experience. Yep. And yeah, so just reach out and be yourself and try as much as you can to stay centered, to stay balanced, deep breathing, of course. If you can, do some yoga, meditate, and I think self-care is key.
Thank you so much. And now if I address the same question to Yifeng, with COVID-19 and the pandemic taking a toll on mental health, young people may be increasingly anxious about their job prospects, their education, generally their future. How should they be coping with this uncertainty from your expertise of working with so many young people?
Actually, before that, I was just doing deep breathing. As Eric was saying, I mean, I'm just doing it, right?
It's taking you out of fight or flight mode. It's very
totally,
important.
right? And I hope that I think some of you over at home, I think when you're going through those stressful situations, will also take Eric's advice to also do that. I think for one first, COVID-19 is a huge transition that each and every one of us is going through. I mean, we use the term unprecedented. We really have not seen something like that, probably for this generation. And I think when we look at that, it adds a layer of transition on top of transitions that you are maybe going through, right? For example, transitioning out from school towards work, school to school, or even I think, for example, starting a family, having a kid. These are all huge transitions that we are going through. And I think in each level of uncertainty, there will be anxiety. And in fact, some amount of anxiety can be helpful, right? If there's a little bit of anxiety, can help us to do what we can do over here. For example, right, sitting here, I was doing deep breathing because I'm feeling anxious.
It's healthy
right?
adrenaline.
Healthy, yes, that's right. It can be healthy.
Adrenaline is a performance hormone that helps us perform, but too much of this can lead to overwhelm. Sorry, I'm so passionate about this. I don't mean to interject.
Adrenaline can be actually helpful at times, I think. But too much cortisol, right? Stress, I think, can really, just wear us down so much. And I think what uncertainty does bring is often anxiety, a worry about the future of sorts. What I think sometimes when I work with young persons, some of them, what they share with me on what works for them is that sometimes they look at that locus of control, right? So if we put a lot of what we are controlling, what we are focusing on what we can't control, then definitely we'll feel very much anxious. But if we turn it a bit inwards towards what we can control, for example, the things that we like to do, like hobbies, right? Or focusing, for example, on finding work, reaching out for help, like what Eric mentioned, doing deep breathing exercises, really centering that focus back towards, I think, the body of sort. that can become one of the ways that can help us to, I think, work through this uncertainty. But what I want to say is really that we have to acknowledge that it is not easy and that this period of time is a tough time for many of us, right? We are going through multiple transitions, multiple adjustments, and feeling anxious is a common thing. It might be a new normal over here that we are feeling, but it doesn't have to be that way that we live. We can do better, we can cope with it better. And harnessing many of the tips that I think Eric was sharing. Now I shall go back to doing deep breathing.
Thank you so much, Yifeng. But I mean, the key takeaway there is, if you're watching this, you are not alone. That is a shared experience connecting every single one of us, that this pandemic, it's affected your parents and you and your peers. So be vulnerable, like Charlene said. If you're having a rough day, if you're anxious about the future, tell your best friend, I'm anxious about what job I'm going to get after this, and have that shared vulnerability. I'm now going to address our next question to the entire panel, so please feel to jump in, ladies and gents. Look, any suicide is a suicide too many. Suicide prevention, as Eric was saying, needs to be a whole society approach. Where do you see the government's role in this effort, and how can everyday Singaporeans get involved in this cause? I think maybe Elaine, this might be your sweet spot.
Okay, I think especially for those of us who have lost a loved one to suicide, we definitely applaud the recent move to decriminalize suicide, because what it does, it addresses stigma as well as encourages those who are at risk to seek help early. You know, there's no more, they don't have to be afraid to come out anymore. You know, definitely I think what we need in Singapore is a national strategy that is led by a dedicated agency for greater effectiveness, you know, because the magnitude of the problem that we face right now, this pandemic of more and more youth being lost to suicide, it is alarming in the last few years. Therefore, it really warrants the whole society to come together to prevent another loss, you know. And I know that in New Zealand, the government actually created a national suicide prevention office just to tackle the high rate of suicide in New Zealand. What does that tell us? It is really a testimony and a great commitment on their part to aim for zero suicide in their country. So, you know, what we need to do is come together, the whole society, work together collectively. Because when we put all our efforts together, I am so sure the outcome would be more impactful, and it will come out much stronger, you know, because suicide is preventable. So let's aim for zero suicide in Singapore. Yeah.
Thank you. And anyone else would like to jump in there? Maybe Charlene?
Oh, yeah. So I'm sure Please Stay Movement and SOS will welcome more support and funding for the work. Yeah.
Are you eyeballing
Yeah, I was like,
somebody on this side of the panel? I mean,
SOS will be the lead agency.
these ladies are not backwards and coming forwards.
Right.
They're like me. They're like winking. Anyone from this side of the panel want to add
respond?
as well?
Well, I think when we look at suicide, I think just not along the panel, I think we have talked a little bit about the S, right? The S word in a sense, like, and Eric has mentioned about stigma, and I totally agree. I want to add 3 more S's to that, right? Which is, I think when we look at stigma, we can look at it through a more nuanced view. It's not just stigma alone, right? Public stigma, that's one layer. Another one is self-stigma, which is I think what the internalized scripts that the person adopted. Eric mentioned a little bit about the stats earlier as well, 6 and 10, right? Things that they are weak, not sick. Those are internalized scripts that the person might have taken in. And how do we overcome that stigma? Really requires, I think, the whole society approach. That's why we are here as well, to talk about working together to prevent suicide, right? The second S is a social stigma. And that is what we see along in the public attitudes towards persons with mental health issues. The third one is, of course, structural stigma, which we look at, I think, how the society per se is structured as a whole. For example, insurance exclusion, those are some things that persons with mental health issues do deal with. I think one thing that I'm really glad that Eric is here with us today, right? Because I think one of the key things I think that I know about Eric is really, I think, how he has been championing a lot of mentorship and work on the ground in the community setting. And I think that is one of the biggest ways, I think, one of the biggest opportunity and growth areas where we can move towards. What do I mean by that? I think when I look at that, if we take a community mental health approach towards empowering, educating, and equipping our volunteers on the ground, grassroots, right? Really creating that support among them to really reach out to one another. I think that can create that emotional safety net for one another in the neighborhoods. Not only I think and then I think across all neighborhoods in Singapore, that might be a powerful movement I think to take a look at. And I suppose I think that's really a beautiful society and Singapore society that I would love to live in.
I would just like to pitch in one more S to Yifeng's already 3 S. And the fourth S that I think we should look at is probably that of success. Because youth, young people, right, at the point in time where they are just about to finish school, they're just about to enter the workplace, they're looking at what do I do to get successful in life? What do I do to succeed? And what do I do to make myself and my family proud, right? So oftentimes I feel, that's my personal opinion, that I think that our definition of success in Singapore can be broadened, right? How we define success isn't just getting a degree, going to getting a white collar job, be a PME. I think there are many other pathways of success, and I've spoken about this in my maiden parliamentary speech. So if you're keen to, you can Google me online, right? But I think enough of that, because I think having a narrow definition of success definitely gives stress. I think back to the times when I was studying and I was like, oh dear, what if I don't get A for this exam? What if I don't ace this next exam? Is that the end of me, right? And I do see, the point that, if there's too narrow a definition of success, it's going to cause a lot of stress in our youth. So I think that's food for thought for all of us, because it takes a cultural shift, a mindset shift for all of us to think about success in different ways, right? And I just also wanted to address some other points that Elaine and other panelists brought up. I think I fully agree that it takes a whole of village approach, as I mentioned earlier. And I think the attention given to the issue of suicide and to the issue of mental well-being in recent years has just been phenomenal. And I think that's a great sign. If you were to be able to Google the number of times this phrase mental well-being, youth mental well-being has appeared in Parliament, for instance, I think it's going to be, you're going to see a spike if you can put that along on a time chart, right? And that's a good thing, because it shows awareness, it shows emphasis of society as a whole, because Parliament is the reflection of the voices of the people, to want to place more emphasis on this. Right now in schools, in institutes of higher learning, we have counsellors who are there to take care of students if they are in need. In the workplaces, in the community, we have institutions like IMH, institutions like SOS, who are taking care of folks who might need help whenever who needs help whenever they think that they need so. And I think we can do more, which is why ministries like MSF, where I come from, we have stepped up to do a bit more. We are now playing the facilitative role. And since last year, we have actually gotten together a group of people. We crowdsourced, we did an open call. Whoever is committed to the cause of youth mental well-being, we said, come forward. We want you. We want a many helping hands approach. And lo and behold, we have 1,000 of volunteers who came forward to say, look, I want to volunteer my services. And that's the Youth Mental Wellbeing Network that MSF is championing. And alongside that, I think there are also other things that MCCY, for instance, is championing together with NYC. There's a Youth Action Challenge where young people can actually sign up for. And what do they sign up for? They sign up for things that they want to see changed in Singapore, right? So they sign up, they pitch the idea, they based on the merit of the proposal.
Oh, this is great. What did somebody try and pitch? What was the interesting pitch?
And you can actually actually get funding to make concrete, actual changes.
Wow.
And this is again a clarion call to all you youngsters out there who are watching this now or maybe later to come forward and join us and be part of this big group that will together shape our Singapore for the next generation.
Firstly, I feel really sad that I'm no longer one of the youngsters that you're talking about.
Count me in, right?
And secondly, I just want to reiterate that point about success. And I want to say to you, if you're watching this, and I talk about this all the time on my social media, is that you define success for you, and no one has the right to place judgment on your idea of success. And I know that's a really bold thing to say to someone who's still in secondary school, but once I learnt that, my mother was a teacher at one of at the most elite girls' school in Singapore. It starts with an R and ends with an S. And I grew up, even though I grew up in Australia, under that kind of definition that academic success was the only way to go. And she actually stopped talking to me when I moved to be in entertainment for 6 months after my father passed away. I love my mum, like we're best buddies now. But I'm so glad that I lived through that to see the beautiful relationship I have with her and that I got to define that success for myself. So please, define success for you, what makes you happy. Okay, that's my spiel over for a second. Just so passionate about that. So I would now like to also ask for Charlene and Yifeng's answers to this. I'm sure both of you have seen many young people in their darkest hours. Could you share your personal experience engaging young people who've been struggling with mental health? Maybe we'll start with Charlene, then we'll go to Yifeng.
Okay, I want to talk about a young person. Okay, so if you're a young person watching this, and if you have a friend who tells you he or she is suicidal, do not make fun of him or her. Do not make that confession a point of ridicule. Yeah. Because a lot of times, if a person confides in you, be proud of it, because research from the US has actually shown from suicide attempters. That means they attempted, they were rescued, and then they share their story. And when they were interviewed, they actually say that the result is that they usually share with less than 25% of their regular contacts. What it means is that if I have 4 friends, regular friends, I probably only confide in 1 or less, means 0. Yeah. So, but then what happens next? That means the immediate experience after that confession will determine whether they will share again. Yeah. So do our part to play that listening ear and empathy. Now, when you empathize with the suicide wish, it doesn't mean you endorse the plan. You are never part of that suicide plan, but you empathize with the wish to die because the pain is just so immense. That's all we are trying to advocate for. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. I love that empathy. Yifeng, maybe some stories.
Charlene, really, I think you brought a powerful point, right? Empathy is not endorsement, but I think empathy really helps us to go through that when we say that we see you, we care for you. I think what you're really saying that you witness the person, right, in their pain, and that you are there with them in that suffering. While you cannot walk in their shoes, but you are there with them. One thing that I think we do a lot at Chat is we offer that mental health check, and we do see, I think, often young persons in mental health distress. Often, I think, when they're feeling the most distress, I think they will reach out to us, and so I do see that in the young persons. But what I also see, I think, often is also their strengths, right? I think when they come over to me, they will often ask me this question: "Tell me what's wrong? What's wrong with me?" And I think one of the key things that we are also hoping to find out is also not just what's wrong, but also what's strong about the person. And we look at what's strong. There are actually 4 key things that inspires me a lot, right? And I always ask this question to young persons whenever we have a phone call or whenever we see them face to face. I ask them this, right? When we look at suicide, I think, for example, suicidal risk, suicidal ideation is real. So at the same time, what holds you back? What keeps you going? And when I ask this question, I realize that there are always 4 key things that keep coming up, right? And I'd love to share this with you. And it gets me excited when I talk about this because it gives me the reasons for living. It gives me that hope, right? And the 4 F's, the first F is actually family and friends. Often they will say it's the love for the family and friends. I don't want to be a burden. The second F that often many will say is about future, my hope for the future. What Eric mentioned a little bit about success. The dream that even though they may not see what is success, there's a vision, there's a visualization that one day they can actually get there. There's that hope. I think the third F is really about faith as well. Some of them, they have their own spirituality. And I think the fourth F, some mention is about fear, right? Fear of the pain, fear of the unknown of sorts. But all these 4 Fs, when they come together, it gives that person some reasons for living. And I always, I'm so inspired every time when I speak to the young person to find out what is their reason for living, what is strong with them, instead of just focusing on what's wrong with them as well. And I would just like to also invite you, I think as you're watching this live stream as well, to think a little bit about often we can be very good at beating ourselves up, but how can we build ourselves up as well? Can we think about what's strong that we are already doing? What are our skills, strengths, resources? I think when we lean into that, we might see quite a different world.
I love that. And Yifeng, I just want to highlight where he talks about family and friends. In my own work on human connection, those social connections are so important to mental health. So please invest in your social connections, your authentic family and friends around you. And Charlene, and I think yes, Charlene, could you also add any experiences beyond what you just mentioned before?
So sorry?
Sorry, was there anything else you wanted to add to any of those stories or any of those mental health moments?
Just now what Yifeng mentioned, just now you mentioned the last word, F, fear. A lot of our people who call us over the hotline and text say, the only reason why I'm leaving now is because I'm scared of death. I don't dare to jump, that's all.
Wow.
Yeah. But then they self-blame, shame and say they are coward. How about this? I want to speak to this coward who wants to leave. I love you. Let's engage in a conversation.
I think that's incredible. Thank you so much.
Simone, if I could add
Yes, of course.
to what the panel has just said. I'm not going to use big words, but really the reality is such that I think for all the kids out there, I'm sure you have come across many of your friends who are struggling. Well, what I want to say is not just empathy, validate their pain, because a lot of these kids, they're in so much pain, and they don't want you to rationalize what went wrong or tell them what to do. Be there for them, listen to them the entire night if you have to. And you need to understand a suicidal mind, your friends, when they die by suicide, it's not because they want to die, but because they're in so much pain, they just want to end that pain. It's not because they have no mental resilience, it's not because they're weak or because they're spoiled. So have that empathy and understand what goes on. And especially if you do get messages from your friend telling you that they plan to take their own life, please react with urgency. Make sure you call them. There's no such thing as, or maybe I'll reply the text tomorrow because he has done this umpteen time. Maybe it will not happen. That one time that you don't respond, it may happen. So I plead for you to not give up on your friend.
So Elaine, while we're speaking to you, I wanted to ask you, what are some of the common reasons that you think young people might not seek help besides the fear of their pain not being validated or their pain being dismissed? What are some other reasons why young people might not?
Well, we all talk about stigma, in the larger society. A lot of times it's also within the family dynamics. Because firstly, if you share, I have cancer, you get so much sympathy because it's seen as a illness. But when you say I have a mental illness, people look at you, there's a misconception, they don't see it as a illness. So that deters the kids from reaching out and sharing openly. And even within the family, sad to say, there are many parents out there who are in denial. They can't accept it because of the shame. So if they might think, I think he's just acting up or asking for attention, so you don't provide the help. And it just gets worse, and private counseling and professional counseling in Singapore is nothing short of $250 an hour.
Yes, I
That
know.
is exorbitant.
Yeah.
The larger population can't afford it. And mental illness treatment is not covered by insurance, generally.
I know I spent $20,000 on mine when I moved to Singapore in 2015. It was the best thing that I ever did, but at the same time, I didn't save anything for a couple of years. It all went to therapy, so thank you for raising that. And Yifeng, do you have any knowledge on the reasons why young people might not seek help?
Yeah, I think just to build upon what Elaine shared, right? I think it's true. I think peer and parental stigma is often, one of the key concerns which actually stop young persons from seeking help. Peer stigma, I think, is one of the largest concerns because youths, I think, in that age group between 16 towards 30 years old, we look for acceptance, right? We are looking for belonging, right? Looking for love, and when someone says that, hey, I'm not going to accept you because of what you're saying, I think that can be so hurting, that can be so distressing to the person. And the person will just say that, let me hide it instead. Let me suffer in silence instead. And that, I think, can be incredibly debilitating as well as incredibly painful for the person. And so, the other side of things, I think, is sometimes young persons do share with me as well that parents, for example, may not be exactly endorsing, or they come from a conservative society, a conservative family, which may not endorse, sees mental health as something that is very trivial, like, get over it, step out of it, right? Those are common words that sometimes might be used. But the interesting thing that, though, I must say, is that there are actually quite a big shift these days. I'm seeing that, I think, for example, over at chat, right? Actually, a lot of times, actually, young people, peers are the one who actually share with their friends, right? For the past 5 years, we have had like 190% jump in terms of referrals, right? And it's because I think a lot of things, because of peers actually reaching out to them and also recommending that, hey, perhaps you want to go over and just have a chat with chat, right? And over there, I mean, that's where I think you start to open up the conversations. And it's also very heartening for me whenever I see the parent or the peer actually accompanying them over to the session, because it can be quite scary at times, I think, when they're going through their experiences, very distressing. But I think when they come over there with that support, that means a lot, and that can mean so much, right? And costs, I think, increasingly in Singapore for mental health treatment as well as support has been going down. There has been many resources for help. So for example, at CHAT, we provide that support as well towards referrals, towards community mental health agencies or the hospitals. So there are a variety of places out there that really offer that support. So do reach out, do ask, and support is available and support is affordable as well.
Thank you so much. We're now going to move on to individual questions. Eric, can I just ask you, how can private organisations, people and the youth sector, including schools and parents, better join hands with the government to address well-being among young people?
Right, so I've spoken about the Youth Mental Health Wellbeing Network earlier. So if you are interested, you're a committed individual, come forward, join us in the network. Youth Action Challenge by MCCY and NYC, I spoke about that as well. And I think I also speak out to social media companies in Singapore. And I think TikTok for Good is a good start, it's a great start. And I urge TikTok to continue the conversations with the government. And we will be more than glad to have you guys on board as stakeholders that we can, as I mentioned earlier, it takes a whole village approach. I once again want to reiterate that, and I think we have something going here, and we can all work together to make Singapore an even better place to live in.
Thank you so much. Elaine, I just want to address a question here. The Please Stay movement is truly a moving initiative advocating for a national strategy led by a dedicated agency to prevent suicide, eradicate stigma, and some of the other things that we spoke about. Tell us more about your inspiring movement and what are some elements of national strategy that you already haven't mentioned that could be considered?
Okay, first is the first ground-up advocacy group by mothers who have lost their child to suicide. So what we come with us is a very rich lived experience, and we are stand ready to connect with all the ministries, any ministries, public agencies, private agencies to speak to us in terms of your efforts and your policies in suicide prevention. How much more authentic can it be? Speaking to mothers with lived experience, So of course, having a lead agency to coordinate the efforts, which I already mentioned earlier. I think we need to have more conversations going, because I feel that we are still speaking in whispers, not only in the home environment, but also out there, oh, that person is not, has mental illness or whatever. We still whisper, but when someone has cancer, like I mentioned earlier, it is so easy to speak about it, So anyways, what we have done today to mark the World Suicide Prevention Day is we finally launched our website, and it holds the first virtual memorial. It allows parents who have lost their children to suicide to share memories, in the remembrance page. And it is a very rich, comprehensive resource with a lot of information and conversation going in one place about suicide prevention as well as mental illness. Why I always keep talking about suicide prevention rather than mental illness, because suicide prevention is the overarching umbrella. If you have mental illness, you don't treat it, and therefore the end result is suicide. So it should be suicide prevention as the main umbrella for our conversation. We also have the video called the Shoes Project video, Singapore. It features 13 pairs of shoes to remember the lives of the children lost. These are shoes that are actually worn by our children. So if you want to see the video, you can check out our website on pleasestaymovement.com.
Thank you so much, Elaine. I love the key takeaway there about not whispering about it. It took me a lot of courage to be open about the fact that I've gone to therapy and those things, because I still think there is a stigma, but we have to start talking about it. So it's great that we're here with TikTok today to do so. Charlene, I want to ask you probably our final question is, depression has been called the common cold of mental health problems. Seeking treatment early is really important. So how can parents work closely together with their child and professionals to decide what is the best method of treatment?
First things first, I think we want to address the tiredness and exhaustion of caregivers. It can be next of kin, it can be loved ones or classmates who has been caring for a significant person in distress, depression. And we hear from many caregivers after a certain point, they actually ask us, I find him just being attention seeking, or manipulative. Oh well, it's natural because they have gone through so much and they are tired. Over at our hotline, we also have callers and people who text us so frequently. Do we have doubts whether are they really in need? Yes, there are times we doubt, but we still do our part. But what I can say is this, that if behind every behavior is actually a yearning, a deep yearning and motivation. And if a person need to resort to self-harm or need to resort to suicide attempt, I can only imagine how deep that longing is. It can be a longing for significance, it can be a longing for community or simply connection. Yeah. So what can they do? Now, a few things that we need to do. Parents need to be educated. Just now I mentioned briefly that when a confession happened, when a youth gathered all that courage to speak up, the next thing he or she experienced will determine whether he or she will share again. So parents need to be educated, family members need to be educated what are the best things to say or not say. Yeah. So what not to say, do not ask the person, stop thinking about suicide, it's impossible. Okay, so you differentiate between ideation. We acknowledge the ideation and pain, but it is the action that we want to intervene. Yes. So the action is is their choice. I have ideation, I cannot control that, but I can control my choice of action subsequently. I can choose to self-harm, attempt, or I can choose to talk to someone. Yeah, so you are there to facilitate the action portion.
I love that, the idea of, behind every complaint is a wish, behind every external behavior there's actually a cry for help and a pain there that exists, and to be observant for that. I'd like to address finally, with just our final minute here, to Yifeng. As a mental health professional, part of your role includes eradicating the stigma around mental health. We spoke about this. In society today, is society today more open to discussing mental health issues than maybe when we were young, 20 years ago?
Last year, right?
Thank you.
First, I think certainly. I just want to say, I think Elaine mentioned about conversations, and I think that's really important. I think over the past few years, I've been in the mental health sector for about 10 years, and I've been really trying to keep my keen eye on the ground. And I definitely see more conversations happening over the past, 10 years for sure. And one of the things though that encourages me a lot, that heartens me a lot, is about how they have moved from conversation towards action. And I think that's the beautiful part, right? I mentioned earlier about youth seeking help. Peer stigma can prevent youth from seeking help, but peer support can actually promote help seeking. And I think that's one of the most powerful things, because over at chat, we do see when youth actually refer their friends, they came from a session and then they feel that, hey, it was okay, it was not that scary talking to Yifeng, right? Doesn't look too scary, right? So they were like, okay, you can go over to chat, I think they are not that scary, right? So I think when that happens as well, when a friend, I think that word of mouth is really powerful. over here, I think at TikTok, I think as for example, we are doing this over TikTok, like TikTok for good, right? When people, I think, share resources, when they share like things that, you know, the messages that means a lot to them personally, I think friends connect better with them. And I think over at these platforms, I think Eric mentioned also about social media companies working together. I definitely see, I think, more young people sharing content online. And young youth mental health agencies like ours, I think we're always trying to put out content as well that can share with young persons that they can share as well. But I think the most important is that when the content comes from the young person, as well as the content is actually read by the young person themselves, and they put out that content to encourage others to also, I think, appeal towards others to seek help, or at that moment that the person is really going through the suffering. So I definitely see that I think there has been more being done, moving from conversation to action. Yeah, and that's a good sign.
Thank you so much. I would just like to thank Mr. Eric Chua, Ms. Charlene Heng, Ms. Elaine Leck, and Ku Yifeng for your meaningful sharing. Before we wrap up, do you each have something you'd like to leave our audience tonight with? Just one quick major point. I think we'll start over this end.
Okay, mine is a bit different. I just want to let everyone out there, especially those aged 25 and below, know that if you're on antidepressant, it does have its place in treating mental illness, but I caution for you to please be very, very vigilant. If you find yourself after taking it within the first few weeks or months, and you find yourself having an increased suicide ideation, please ensure that you let your parents know and you let your doctors know. Okay, because it can be very risky. I lost my son 3 weeks after being prescribed an antidepressant in Melbourne. So I hope you guys will be on the lookout for that.
Thank you, Elaine. Yeah, it does take a while to balance it with your hormones and things like that, so be mindful. Charlene, one last thing that you'd like to leave everyone with?
I want to tell everybody, not just young, but not so young, okay, that asking for help is not giving up, it is refusing to give up. You can ask for help by calling us 1-800-221-4444, or you can write to us pat@sos.org.sg, or Facebook message us in the wee hours, 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. Yes.
And Eric?
I'd like to end off with just one word, and that's mindfulness. Mindful of yourself, mindful of self-care. Remember deep breaths. Remember, go for your cardio exercises. Get your endorphin fix.
Yeah.
You know, that saves you for the next 4 days. At least it works for me.
What exercise do you do?
I just run around. and keep the conversations going. I think that's critical. And at some point in time, convert that conversations that we are having. Tonight's a good start. It's a great start actually into action. And we can all do this to make Singapore a better place in terms of mental well-being.
Yifeng?
Yeah, thanks for the chance, I think, to be here for sure. I think one of the things that this quote really struck me, I think, a lot is by Heather Fist, who's a solution-focused suicide prevention specialist. Right? She said, anyone who supports another person's reasons for living is doing suicide prevention. And I think I just want to echo, I think today we are here because we are talking about working together to prevent suicide. And suicide can be grim at times, I think, if you keep talking about it. But when we look at the reasons for living, right behind that, we can't talk about suicide without talking about the reasons for living. If we find it out from a friend, right, and support them, I think like what Elaine mentioned, right, really in that critical moments, going through with them, supporting them through that moments, not giving up on them as well. I think those are really key things. So find your reasons for living, find your friends' reasons for living, and support them.
I absolutely love that, the idea of purpose. And you know, this idea of human connection, it's my work that I do, and I believe that the human connection conversation is actually part of the mental health conversation, because our brains are wired for connection, and when we don't have adequate connection, our brains are actually flooded with stress hormones like your cortisol, your norepinephrine. So please surround yourself with good people that support you, that embrace your vulnerability. An authentic connection will never reject your vulnerability. They will listen to you. So I would like to thank every single one of our panelists for giving so much time tonight. We feel just absolutely blessed that you've shared your stories. And this evening has been really insightful. I hope it's been really insightful for you. Overall, based on what we've talked about, I can see three main trends here. We talked about stigma being a huge thing throughout the discussion, this need to talk openly about mental wellness and also about suicide prevention, openly and without the whispering. Another thing that I loved that ran through was this idea of releasing ourselves from that pressure. Young people, releasing yourself from that pressure that your success must be the same as everybody's idea of success. And I think that that's really important as well. And one of the major things that I think everyone should, if you are the friend or the parent or the loved one of a young person who you think is at risk, please be observant. Look for those signs and do not dismiss their pain or their cry for help. It can be very, very traumatic. So with the pandemic reminding us that human connection and mental resilience are more important than ever before, we hope you've learnt and continue to spread this dialogue about positivity and mental well-being. It's so important. I certainly strive to do the same on my TikTok. If you've seen my stuff over at Simone Heng, there's a lot of stuff about mental resilience and positivity in my videos, and hopefully we can see lots more creators as well. Besides the fantastic dancing and lip syncing on TikTok, some deeper dialogue as well. I want to remind you that if you are experiencing right now, if you look at me, if you are experiencing some depression, you're not feeling great, please, you can talk to people at Samaritans. They have a 24-hour hotline at Samaritans of Singapore. The number is 1800 221 4444. It's 1800 221 4444. So please, if you are feeling unwell, take the liberty of calling them and speaking to some of Charlene's incredible people. Now, I think we have a couple of minutes left, so I think I would just like to share my experience for the first time, April of this year during the global pandemic, losing my mentor, and we talked about mentorship. This is when I was in radio in Dubai, and he wasn't just my work mentor, he was also my life mentor. And he had gone through a very unfortunate marriage breakup, lost his job during the crisis that ensued from this pandemic. And upon returning back to Melbourne in the global, in quarantine, took his life. And I had experienced grief before and loss of my father and my mother becoming paralyzed. But I can say that suicide leaves a lack of closure, which I think is really quite profound. And so please, if you're feeling at risk, once again, I would love for you to lean on the people in your life. We would love for you to be connected and call the Samaritans of Singapore hotline. It's 1800 221 4444. Once again, I would like to thank our panel Parliamentary Secretary Eric Chua, Ku Yi-fen, Charlene, thank you so much. Elaine, thank you very much. And from TikTok Singapore, me, Simone Heng, have a wonderful evening, guys.